Hello there everyone, welcome to the channel if you're new, welcome back if you aren't, I'm EDJ, and we are continuing with Kings and General Caesar series. So last time we learned about the Chad Ventinius, who basically soloed Parthia, defeated Labienus, killed their king, all in one master stroke, and then faded from history without any further explanation. Like, talk about a Chad. So now we're going to be focusing on Octavian's attack of Pompey. So yeah, finally we need to get rid of Pompey. He's been around forever. Sextus needs to go. He's kind of been saved because everything else that's been happening, all the other battles, but I think now that Octavian is setting his sights on him, obviously I think, about to lose, so we're about to just jump into it. Let's get to it, guys. If you want to watch the original video of me talking or speaking, the link is always down in the description. Without any further ado, let's learn some history.
In previous episodes covering the period between 41 and 38 BC, we saw how Octavian defeated Mark Antony's brother Lucius and his wife Fulvia in Italy, while Antony's lieutenant Ventidius successfully repulsed a Pompeian Parthian invasion in the east. At the same time, the uneasy alliance agreed at Misenum between Octavian, Antony and Sextus Pompey had disintegrated, despite the three men all being linked by marriage. The Peace of Misenum was broken less than a year after it was made, and the Sicilian War reignited. In this episode, we shall cover Octavian's planned invasion of the island, and the numerous disasters that plagued the expedition. When the Octavian likely had been actively looking for reasons to undermine the peace treaty and declare war on Sextus. Antony's extortion of Sextus's provinces and the defection of Menas to Octavian had certainly been significant factors, but more importantly, Octavian's forces had also captured pirates around the Mediterranean, who Octavian proclaimed were in service to Sextus, despite Sextus denying this. To add personal insult to this, Octavian divorced Scribonia, the daughter of Sextus's brother-in-law. Even more egregiously, Octavian had declared this divorce in October 39 BC, immediately after Scribonia gave birth to his only natural child, Julia. In all likelihood, Octavian had used the Pact of Misenum merely to buy time to consolidate his position until he was ready. By the spring of 38 BC, his forces were amassed, though the precise numbers for this time are unclear. Almost non-stop war had drained Italy of its manpower, but soldiers had been raised from provinces in Illyria, Gaul and Hispania. Octavian would have had approximately 25 legions under his command, though how many he had immediate access to is unknown. His fleet size is also hard to know, though it must have been large enough for Octavian to feel confident to challenge Sextus, so perhaps 150 to 200 warships would be a reasonable estimate. Octavian split this force into two parts, planning to attack Sicily from two fronts. The first, sailing from Etruria, would be commanded by the defector Menas and Calvisius Sabinus, an officer who had served competently under Caesar's command during the Pharsalus campaign. The second, leaving from Tarentum, would be commanded by Octavian himself. The army, meanwhile, would march down to Rhegium in preparation to be transported across to Sicily once the Pompeian fleet had been annihilated. Upon hearing of these movements, Sextus similarly divided his navy into two, commanding one portion in Messana, awaiting Octavian's arrival, while sending a second portion under his freedman Menecrates to confront Menas and Calvisius. Menecrates' fleet came upon the Etrurian fleet at night near Cumae. However, neither side wished to risk a dangerous night battle, so Menas and Calvius retreated into the bay. When morning broke, they drew their fleet up in a defensive crescent formation, with Menas commanding the left and Calvisius the right, positioning themselves as close to the shore as possible so that Menecrates' ships would not be able to break through their line. Menecrates exploited this, attacking across the line and pushing Octavian's fleet back, where many of their ships were either beached or caught on rocks and rendered immobile. Menecrates, with the advantage of the open sea at his back, was able to continually cycle fresh ships into the fight, while much of the Caesarian fleet was effectively stranded. In Appian's words, it was as if Menes and Calvius's men were like land forces contending against sea forces.
Wow.
As the battle raged, Menecrates caught sight of Menes's ship and ordered his vessel to attack. The two ships rammed into each other and grapples were thrown, binding the two ships together, with fierce fighting breaking out on the decks. Menes's ship was slightly taller than Menecrates', so his men had a slight advantage, as arrows, stones and javelins flew between the two crews. During the fighting, both commanders were wounded. Menes was shot through the arm with an arrow, and Menecrates took a javelin to the thigh. The latter was rendered unable to fight, but continued to urge his men on. Despite their brave fighting, however, Menes's men gradually got the upper hand, and rather than be taken captive, Menecrates flung himself into the sea and drowned.
Dang.
Calvisius, keen to capitalize on this success, moved his ship and a few others to Menes's flank, managing to cut off part of the Pompeian ships there and forcing them to retreat, with Calvisius in pursuit.
Wow, like, you know, the Pompeian side at the beginning was kind of dominating, and I literally thought they were about to just completely decimate the Caesarians, but this is completely turned around to the Caesarians' favor, and that's kind of amazing. That was real neck and neck right there, guys.
Nonetheless, the move had weakened the Caesarian right, and many were destroyed or burnt on the rocks, the remnants only being saved by the return of Calvisius' ships. The battle ended as night fell. The Caesarians had had the worst of the fighting, losing far more vessels than the Pompeians. Nevertheless, with the death of Menecrates, the Pompeians had lost one of their most talented naval commanders, and the fleet, now under the command of Menecrates' lieutenant Demochares, retreated to Sicily. The Caesarians cautiously maintained their position, but once they had become certain that the Pompeian fleet had left, began repairs on their ships in preparation for uniting with Octavian around Rhegium.
Fast-track your career path with short-term training at UEI College in Southern California. With camp.
Octavian had by now already reached Rhegium. Hearing that Sextus only had 40 ships in Messana, his generals urged him to attack immediately. However, not knowing of the events at Cumae, Octavian insisted on waiting for Calvisius and Menes. It proved a serious blunder, as the time he spent waiting allowed Demochares to return to Sicily successfully and reunite with Sextus. When news of the battle did reach Octavian, he decided to sail through the straits to meet the other portion of his fleet. As he did, however, his fleet was harassed by Sextus' ships that attacked along various points of the line. Octavian, either reluctant to fight in the straits or determined not to give battle without reinforcements, ordered his ships to continue without engaging, and several were cut off and destroyed. Some of his captains disobeyed the orders, turning to meet the Pompeians, one even successfully taking the flagship of Demochares, though the Pompeian managed to escape. Calvisius' fleet also arrived on the scene, but night soon fell, ending any fighting. Octavian's Sicilian invasion had got off to a poor start, many ships having been lost in the previous battle, and still more to Sextus' harassing tactics. Attempting to consolidate his forces, Octavian drew Calvisius' fleet up in a defensive formation, while he pulled his vessels close to the shore to conduct repairs. Disaster struck yet again, however, when a massive storm swept through. The Pompeian ships, which had managed to make it into Sicilian harbours, were safe, while Octavian's, close to the coast, were dashed against rocks. The notoriously treacherous waters of the straits crashed his ships into one another, with the infamous whirlpools drowning many who fell into the sea. Only Menes' squadron, which had the foresight to put out to open water, managed to avoid calamity. It was a scene of utter carnage, with the cries of men thrown overboard lasting throughout the night and crushing his men's morale. By the time the storm finally broke, most of Octavian's fleet, including the sailors, had been lost. By approximately the summer of 38 BC, Octavian realized that his invasion had been a failure, leaving the fleet and making for Vibo, warning his friends and generals to be prepared for any potential uprisings against him, and stationing men along the coast in preparation for an invasion of Italy by Sextus. When Sextus got wind of these events and how devastating the storm had been, he interpreted it as a sign of the gods' favour and proclaimed himself the son of Neptune. Despite the significant losses Octavian had suffered, Sextus did not press his advantage, likely because he was not confident that he would have the manpower to pull off an invasion of the mainland. Octavian, however, was not a man to give up easily. He sent word to Antony requesting his support, and perhaps most importantly, recalled Agrippa, who had been governing in Gaul and quelling revolts. Octavian would prepare for yet another attempted invasion, and this time Agrippa would lead.
Heck yeah, awesome, the Chad Agrippa has come. Octavian's invasion kind of failed, obviously, as we saw, a complete disaster. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Agrippa who wins, because Agrippa's like a genius of warfare, that he kind of like creates or trains a navy and overall just turns the situation around.
Agrippa was made consul for 37 BC, despite being significantly under the traditional minimum age for the office, and immediately undertook the task of creating a vast fleet for Octavian. However, he soon realized that there was no harbor on the west coast of Italy to house such a large fleet.
So he just makes his own, which I love Agrippa. I'm sorry, I'm just a fanboy of Agrippa. But yeah, the dude just basically creates a navy, trains them by like putting water on the mainland, and yeah, just amazing. And then it beats Sextus in his own game. Like, what's not to love about Agrippa?
More importantly, he would need a port where the ships could be constructed secretively, free from attacks by Sextus's forces. Undeterred, Agrippa began the construction of one of the Roman Republic's greatest engineering achievements, the Portus Julius. Agrippa knew that Lake Averno would be hidden from any ships sailing the coast, so he planned for this to be the base of his harbour, linking Lake Averno to Lake Lucrino with a canal, and from Lucrino to the sea with a second canal. The harbour he built would prove to be large enough to hold the whole fleet and conduct training maneuvers. Combined with a large tunnel that led to the port from Cumae, the Portus Julius could build ships, train sailors, and supply without any risk of detection from the sea.
Genius.
It was a marvel of logistics and engineering.
Dude, I know, right? It is beautiful, amazing. Like, Agrippa, I think by the end of all this, becomes like the greatest military man of Rome, commander. And you can see it, the man just thought of this. This is amazing that he came up with such a creative solution to this big problem and negated Sextus Pompey and beat him at his own game. So just perfect.
The ruins of which can still be seen under the waters today. Octavian's position improved further in the spring of 37 BC, when Antony arrived in Tarentum with 300 ships to assist in the invasion, and messages were sent to Lepidus in Africa to prepare his forces for the attack. Octavian was not ready yet though, as many of his ships were still under construction. Antony, who was organizing his Parthian campaign, was frustrated at this delay, but persisted, hoping that Octavian would repay the favor by assisting whenever Antony's invasion of Parthia began. Octavian, however, was still angry at Antony for not having sent men to help the previous year. It is even possible that Octavian deliberately slowed the production of his own fleet to frustrate Antony's plans. On this occasion, Antony acted as the bigger man, probably listening to the advice of his wife, Octavian's sister Octavia. He assured Octavian they were allies with no bad blood, working towards the same common goal. The two were reconciled, declaring that they and Lepidus would hold triumviral power for another 5 years, without consulting anyone else, including Lepidus himself. Octavian nonetheless
Poor Lepidus, man, just constantly being left out. Alright, I guess we'll hold on to power for longer. They just decide that between the two.
He had no choice but to delay the invasion again the following year. Antony, unable to postpone his Parthian invasion any longer, offered a compromise by gifting Octavian 130 ships in return for the promise of 4 of Octavian's legions. Octavian gladly accepted the offer. Meanwhile, Menas, for unknown reasons, defected yet again, going back to Sextus's side. Calvisius, who failed to report this to Octavian, was removed from his position, and Agrippa was made overall commander of Octavian's navy. By the spring of 36 BC, Octavian was ready. He had roughly 300 ships, including the 130 of Antony under Antony's lieutenant Taurus, and 21 legions picked for the invasion. Lepidus was also ready in Africa with 70 warships, 12 legions, and auxiliaries. The plan was simple. Taurus would attack Sicily from the east, Lepidus from the south and west, and Octavian and Agrippa from the north. They would effectively attack Sicily from all sides and overwhelm it.
You want to be a software engineer, right? Go to elgocademy.com. Use our step-by-step coding.
Yeah, this is a great plan, you know, essentially just overwhelm them with your numbers, and a war on 3 fronts is never optimal, right? Never fun, and you have legions and just... I wonder if Sextus has been building his power up during all this time. He must have, surely. So we don't know how many ships he has at the moment, but he would have to divide his forces and divide and conquer, so, you know, the numbers game essentially to overwhelm.
The invasion began, but yet again it was plagued by disaster. Lepidus, sailing from Africa, was hit by a large storm that destroyed almost 1,000 supply ships in the crossing. The same storm also hit Octavian and Agrippa's section, forcing them to return to Italy to spend 30 days repairing their vessels. Despite these setbacks, however, Lepidus's contingent had successfully landed on Sicily, besieging Lilybaeum and winning over other cities in the area. In an attempt to capitalize on this foothold, Lepidus tried to transport 4 more legions over. However, they had not been provided with an escort to move them quickly, and elements of Sextus's fleet could attack them in the crossing, causing 2 legions worth of men to be lost in the fight. Nevertheless, Sextus still acted cautiously, keeping his fleet safe in port, and sending a relief force to Lilybaeum. This lack of offensive action caused Menas to, once more, change sides, defecting back to Octavian, who readily accepted him, but ordered him to be watched closely.
Oh my goodness, this dude just keeps jumping back and forth. I'm surprised no one just killed him because he can't be trustworthy, right? He's not trustworthy, right? Oh well.
Only hold limited command. When Octavian sailed his portion of the fleet to the Aeolian Islands and still got no response from Sextus, it encouraged him to be even more aggressive. Leaving Agrippa in command of the fleet, he returned to Italy to take 3 legions to Taurus in Tarentum, intending to lead Taurus's force personally to attack from the east. At the same time, Agrippa would continue attacking Sicily from the north. Agrippa left around 50 ships in port at Hiera and sailed with perhaps 100 ships to Mylae, where he had learned that Demochares was stationed with 40 ships, hoping to win a quick and easy victory. Sextus, meanwhile, heard of this movement and sailed personally to Demochares' position with a further 115 ships. When Agrippa realized he was now facing almost all of the Pompeian navy, he immediately sent word back to Hiera to bring up the rest of his ships as quickly as they could and drew up his fleet for battle. Sextus chose not to command the battle personally, instead observing from the shoreline and assigning command to his lieutenant Papias. The Pompeian fleet was slightly larger, and with years of naval experience were the better sailors, sailing in slightly smaller and faster ships, prioritizing naval skill and trained to disable enemy vessels. On the other hand, Agrippa's fleet had heavier and slower ships, built primarily for boarding enemy ships, to better utilize the Caesarian advantage in more experienced infantry. On top of this, the greater size of Agrippa's ships meant that his missile troops on the ship's towers would have a slight height advantage. The battle commenced. The Pompeian ships, using their greater maneuverability, to destroy the Caesarian oars, aiming to isolate individual ships or small groups of the enemy to take them out of the battle. Pompeian ships that got too close were quickly grappled by the Caesarians and pulled closer. The Caesarians, from their higher decks and towers, showered the Pompeians with arrows and javelins before boarding, many Pompeians abandoning their ships and jumping overboard.
Dang, dude, Agrippa, man. I'm telling you, the man's a genius. And I was wondering, yeah, Sextus, it seems weird that he wouldn't want to command this personally, because this seems like the final stand for him, right? He's surrounded, the enemies is basically has a foothold on his island. You'd think he would want to just go all in, right? But I guess he just preferred from standing in the shore, so... Oh, I did question that, but yeah, now we see Agrippa, man, just wrecking him right now in this opening part of the battle.
During the course of the battle, Agrippa located Papius's ship and engaged it with his own, shattering the hull with the initial ram. Papius was able to escape to another ship nearby and re-engaged. Still, Sextus from the shore realized that the battle was going poorly, and seeing Agrippa's reinforcements approaching on the horizon, ordered a withdrawal. The Pompeian ships were able to execute a well-ordered withdrawal to nearby shoals, where Agrippa's heavier and larger vessels would not be able to pursue them. Initially, Agrippa planned to blockade the fleet to keep them pinned, but convinced by his captains that he should not risk losing his victory to a storm, he agreed to withdraw. It had nonetheless been an overwhelming victory for the Caesarians, Agrippa losing just 5 ships and managing to capture or destroy 30. After numerous disastrous setbacks, Octavian's invasion of Sicily finally had its first significant success under Agrippa. Lepidus's siege of Lilybaeum was still ongoing, and the capture of some smaller towns in the area had given him a foothold in western Sicily. Hearing of Agrippa's success, Octavian was eager to capitalize on it and secure a similar base in the east, sailing with 3 legions and the rest of the navy, and landing around Tauromenium. Sextus, however, was a shrewd commander, and not to be underestimated. Leaving a small portion of his fleet at Mylae to give the impression that the harbour was still full, Sextus sailed with most of his ships under the cover of darkness towards Tauromenium. Octavian would soon find himself almost completely surrounded and fighting for his life. In our next episode, we will cover this battle and the rest of Octavian's Sicilian invasion.
So yeah, that seems to be the end of that. And once again, I'm just impressed by Agrippa. Like, I love Agrippa, I'm a huge fan of him. So I was happy to see him and the beginning of his Chadness as he gains more military power, right? So yeah, Octavian now has to hold his own against Pompey, and I guess we'll see. Pompey, man, I have to give it to him. The man is resilient, tenacious, persistent. He's been around for a long time, and you just have to give him. He has had Roman stubbornness, that I will not die thing, that just makes... He's very admirable. But, yeah, I guess we'll see next time how he does against Octavian. So I'll see you all then. Bye, everyone.